Once you have prospected intelligently, so you're sitting in front of a person who can and will buy and pay within a reasonable period of time, and you've built a high enough level of rapport and trust and credibility, and you've carefully identified his or her needs and wants, so you and the customer are perfectly clear about how your product or service can help, then the next stage is to give a persuasive presentation. Now, the presentation is called the inner game of selling, and this is where the actual sale is made. Everything up to now, it's sort of like a restaurant. Everything up to now has been preparation, but it is the dinner on the plate that determines the success of the dinner and the success of the restaurant. It is during the presentation where you transform a skeptical or reluctant prospect into a committed customer. Now, an effective presentation can increase your sales by several times over an unplanned and uncoordinated explanation of your product or service. Most people make up their presentation as they go along. At least that's what I did when I started off. And then I went to a top salesman and I said, "Why are you making so many more sales than me?" And he said, "Well, show me your presentation and I'll critique it for you." I said, I don't have a presentation. Can you show me yours? So he sat me down, and I still remember, and he showed me a professional presentation that had been developed by a company he had worked for that enabled him to sell 5 and 10 times as much as anyone else. And I remember looking at that presentation saying, wow. And I started to use the presentation he taught me, and my sales changed forever, as they will change for you. Now, once you've determined that the prospect needs the product and can use the product and can benefit from your product and can afford the product, it's time to persuade him or her to take action in buying your product. Now, here's the good news. Fully 95% of sales presentations can be improved in some way, and sometimes they can be improved in big ways. So keep working on your presentation until you sell successfully to a qualified prospect almost every single time. I've worked with companies that have spent many years and thousands of dollars developing and perfecting a presentation. And once they have the presentation perfected, they can train completely inexperienced salespeople who can go out the next day and make sale after sale. I've also worked with salespeople who've been in sales for many years, and they're still selling off the top of their head. They're still saying whatever falls out of their mouth to say. Their presentation is disorganized in their own mind, and it comes out in a disorganized way. Now, the presentation is actually a logical and orderly way of moving from the general to the specific. We call this down the sales funnel. Most general topics at the beginning, and you move down. The customer must be open and interested and curious about the product or service before you begin to talk. There seems to be a perfect time in a sales conversation where the customer will actually say something like, well, what have you got? Or tell me about your product. That's at the time that you begin to present your product. And if you start to present too soon, the prospect will become skeptical and suspicious and will often withdraw. The environment for the presentation must be such that the customer can pay attention to the salesperson. This is very important because customers like you are easily distracted if the phone is ringing or someone is walking past or someone is coming in. So what you want to do is you want to create the environment within the customer's office or at the customer's desk or table or even in another location where the customer can pay complete attention to you while you're talking about your product or service. Your positioning in the mind of the customer is perhaps the most important factor in determining how much and how quickly you sell. We say in selling, positioning is everything. And the question about position is, how are you and your company and your product or service thought about by the customer? Each customer has a mental file where he or she stores every impression and experience regarding you and your company. Your position in the customer's mind determines if he buys, how quickly he buys, how much he negotiates over your price, and whether he buys again or recommends his friends to you. So your job in every aspect of selling is to influence the way the customer thinks and feels about you. And this brings us to a great breakthrough in selling that I developed myself and have trained more than 1 million salespeople in this formula. I call it the golden triangle of selling. You know, a triangle is like this, and this is pure gold. And this formula is based on the experience of top salespeople everywhere, for me now, in 60 countries. Thousands of customers have been interviewed, and they were asked how they thought about the best salespeople. The interviewers knew who the top salespeople were in a particular company, so they would interview customers and they would say, how do you think about this particular person when their name comes up? And they found that customers consistently described top salespeople in 3 ways. First, they described top salespeople as their friend. They saw a salesperson as a friend who cared about their well-being, not as a salesperson. The second word that they used to describe top salespeople, the second position in the customer's mind, is they saw a top salesperson as an advisor. They saw the salesperson as a trusted expert who gives good advice. And the third way that customers see top salespeople is as a teacher. They saw the salesperson as a teacher, someone who taught them how to most benefit from the product or service once they started using it. Now this brings us to 3 selling strategies used by top salespeople. And if you combine all 3 of them in a triangle, you can double and triple your sales almost immediately. The first selling strategy is what we call relationship selling. And this is where you do everything possible to position yourself as a friend with the customer. In other words, you build a relationship first before you try to sell or before you mention your product or service. The second strategy is called consultative selling. And this is where you position yourself as a consultant, as an expert, as a trusted advisor by focusing on helping the customer to solve his problems or achieve his goals. Now the third selling strategy, which you use in combination with the first 2, is called educational selling. This is where you position yourself as a teacher, teaching the prospect how he can most benefit from using your product or service. Many years ago, IBM was the biggest and best company in the world. And then in the late 80s, they got into a lot of financial trouble and their sales dropped dramatically. So they brought in a new president, and the new president hired a major consulting company to interview people all over the country to find out what had happened to IBM that had caused their sales to go down. And they found the answer. And the answer was that during the growth period of IBM for 50, 60 years, their salespeople and their staff spent a lot of time teaching their customers how to get the most value from IBM products. But after they had had some management changes, the top executives decided that salespeople shouldn't spend so much time in the field with customers, and they kept them in the office and they forced them to fill out paperwork. And other companies came into the market quickly with educational selling strategies and took an enormous amount of the market away, and they still have it to this day. Educational selling is really, really important to your customer. So, once you have positioned yourself as a friend and as an advisor and as a teacher, the next step in persuasive presentations is for you to plan your presentation thoroughly in advance. Plan your presentation step by step, almost like you're writing a book or writing a song or a poem or building a house. An organized presentation is so much more powerful than a random presentation that you cannot leave this to chance. Now, another factor is review your presentation before every customer meeting. No matter how many times you've given your presentation, go over the notes carefully. Refresh your mind, almost like an athlete warms up before competition, every competition, As a sales athlete, you must warm up as well, because preparation is the mark of the professional. When you warm up immediately prior to meeting with a customer, you're more confident, you're more positive, you're more relaxed, and you're far more persuasive. Now, there are specific presentation methods that make sales, and it took me many years to learn these, but some of them are very powerful. The first is for you to sit next to the prospect rather than across a desk or a table. You see, when you sit across a desk, this is adversarial. It's almost like an enemy against an enemy. It's a contest. It's a competition. Are you going to win, or is the customer going to win? Are you going to make the sale, or is the customer going to keep their money? But when you sit next to a customer and you show your product or service and talk about it, it's like two friends sitting together to talk about something of mutual interest. So what I would do is, if I was across the desk from a customer, I'd say, is there somewhere we could sit sort of on the corner of a table where I could show you these ideas and materials more comfortably? And every customer I ever asked in all my career said, oh, yes, of course, sure. Interesting, I also learned this: if there is no other place to go, take your chair around the desk of the customer and sit next to the customer behind his desk or behind her desk. I've never had a customer object to this strategy, and it's amazing how much easier it is to sell when you're sitting next to a customer than opposite a customer. Another selling strategy is called show, tell, and ask questions. I love this. Everything in threes: show, tell, and ask a question. For example, you would say, this is a new feature we have recently added to this product. Show. This is what it does and how it works and why it's a benefit to you. Tell why the customer should be interested. Is this something that you would like or use in your business? This is ask a question to get feedback to find out if this part of your product or service is actually of value or interest to the customer. You always solicit feedback by asking questions. Now, what is it that poor salespeople do? Is they show and tell, show and tell, show and tell. But they never ask questions. They never ask for feedback, and so they may be talking about something that the customer doesn't even care about. Another strategy is for you to teach the prospect how he or she can most benefit from enjoying or using your product or service. This was the IBM strategy from 1928 till 1988. What is that, 60 years? Is they continually educated and taught their customers how to get maximum value from the product. Here's an interesting fact. The more you teach your customer about how much they can use and enjoy your product, the more they want to buy it. The higher is their buying desire. So you are actually selling by teaching. You are selling by not even trying to sell. Just teach the customer how much better off he or she would be with your product or service. Now, another buying strategy, which is really important, is for you to create exciting mental pictures of the prospect enjoying and using and benefiting from your product. You see, people cannot buy a product or service until they can see themselves using and enjoying it. So use words like, just imagine. Just imagine using this product or service in your business. Just imagine this vacation or this wonderful cruise in the Caribbean. Just imagine. When you say these powerful words, people immediately create a picture and see themselves in the picture. And without that picture, they can't buy. Now, another thing you can say is, think about what a difference this would make. Think about what a difference this would make in your home or your work when you were using this on a regular basis. Think about a difference this would make when you lost all that excess weight. Think what a difference it would make if you could get all of your work done in 2 hours less each day. So whenever you think about, people think about and create a mental picture. Another question you can ask is, can you see yourself using this in your work? Can you see yourself using this at home? Can you see yourself doing this with your family? The more you can create a mental picture in the customer's mind of themselves actually using and enjoying the product or service, the more rapidly they buy the product or service. Now, another strategy is to get the prospect active and involved in the presentation. Get him or her moving, doing something. You see, a prospect that sits there passively while you talk about your product is not a good prospect. So I want you to think about going and buying a car. Imagine you go and you say, I'm interested in this car at the dealership. And the driver says, oh, wonderful, and jumps in the car and drives off. And drives around the block and beeps their horn saying, here I am, and drives around the block 2 or 3 times and then drives back and says, well, how did you like that? Well, you'd say, you must be crazy. That's not how you sell a car. You have the person drive the car and you sit with them. You don't drive the car yourself. Many salespeople talk about their product or service and they show it and they pick it up and they don't ever get the customer involved. But once the customer starts talking and moving and calculating numbers and opening pages and experimenting or touching your product or service, they start to get involved and interested in owning it. Another strategy for making persuasive presentations is for you to use what we call the trial close throughout. Sometimes this is called the pulse close. Sometimes it's called the check close. It's basically to find out where the customer is as you go along. Now, a trial close question can be answered with a no without ending the sales presentation. For example, you could say, do you like this color? And the prospect can say, no, I don't like that color at all. You'd say, well, that's okay. We have lots of other colors. Or, would you use this in your business? No, we have no need of that in our business. Well, that's great. It will do many other things other than that. So when you ask a trial close, you get feedback. And feedback gives you guidance on where to go in the sales conversation. You might say, would this new feature be something that you would use in your business or your personal life? And wait for feedback. Remember, whenever you ask a question, remain completely silent and listen closely to the answers. If you ask enough questions and you listen closely enough to the answers, the customer will eventually tell you everything you need to know to make a sale. Now, use the principle of 3 in presenting. The principle of 3 is very powerful because human beings are greatly influenced by things that are said in 3s. And here's one of my favorite techniques. It takes a little bit of thinking for you to design your presentation, but I've taught this to companies that have gone on and done tens of millions of dollars worth of business. And the principle of 3 says, you take and you say these words, because of this, and you describe the product feature, you can, and then you describe the product benefit, which means, and then you describe the customer benefit. Let me give you an example. Because of this flat screen, television, you can put it on any wall of your house, which means you can turn your living room into a theater for your family and friends. In other words, what you do is you say, because of this, you can, which means you take every part of your product or service and you design a little 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Because of this, you can, which means. And it's amazingly persuasive when you use this with your product or service in your presentation. Now, it's very important that you are positive and confident and optimistic about how good your product or service really is and how good it can be for the customer. According to a university study, your conviction or your belief is the most powerful single factor with a prospect who likes and respects you. You see, what we have found is that successful selling is defined as a transfer of enthusiasm. Is the enthusiasm that is in your mind and heart is transferred to the customer's mind and heart, and the sale takes place. Your level of belief or conviction exerts a powerful influence on your customer. The more you believe in the goodness of your product or service, the easier it is for the customer to buy it from you. Now here's another powerful selling technique, one of the most powerful ever discovered, and it's called anecdotal selling. Now, anecdotal selling is also story selling. And this is where you tell success stories about your happy customers who bought this product. What we have found is throughout the ages, whenever you talk about someone else in a positive way, the person you're talking to thinks about being that person. The buying decision is made in the right brain. In other words, the right brain is responsible and activated by pictures and images and stories and emotions and music. Your left brain takes in facts and details and information, but your right brain integrates them into a complete picture and makes a decision. When you tell a success story about a happy customer, the person you're talking to automatically projects themselves into the person of the happy customer. The person sees themselves enjoying your product or service just like the happy customer you're talking about. There are many companies that have built very large sales by having one really excellent story that they tell over and over again about a happy customer. Now, there's one other factor too, and it's unhappy customers. So you can tell a story about someone who used your product or service and was really happy, but you can also tell a story about someone who was offered your product or service and decided not to get it and was very sad as a result. Now, tell success stories of happy female customers when you speak to a woman. Tell success stories of happy male customers when you talk to men. You can tell stories of people who failed to buy your product or service and how unhappy they were afterwards. I heard a story recently of a specialty insurance salesman who sells a form of liability insurance, blanket insurance for business people. The gentleman was driving home after he had bought this policy. It was a rainy, foggy night. The traffic was going by. He looked to the left before he turned the corner to the right, and then he turned the corner to the right and accelerated just as someone ran across in front of him to get out of the rain. And he accidentally hit this person. This person required $900,000 of medical treatment and rehabilitation. But just the day before, the driver had bought a $1 million policy. If he had not bought the policy, he would have gone bankrupt and it would have ruined his whole life. But because he bought the policy, he was safe. Now, the insurance salesman who had this experience tells this story at every single customer presentation, and he's one of the highest paid and most successful insurance salespeople in his field. So he talks about a success story, and then he said if he did not have that insurance, he would have had a tremendous failure story. So constantly think, what are the very best stories that you can tell about people who bought from you and how happy they were, and people who did not buy from you and what happened to them. At the end of an excellent presentation, the customer should be eager to enjoy the benefit of what you are selling. This is your goal in making persuasive presentations. And now here are 7 exercises that you can use to help you to make better presentations in the future. Number 1, why is a planned presentation more effective than a random presentation that changes with each prospect? Number 2, give 3 reasons why your positioning in the customer's mind is important, if not essential, to making the sale. And number 3, what are the 3 words that customers use to describe top salespeople? Number 4, what are the 3 methods of selling used by top performers, as we just discussed a few minutes ago? Number 5 is list 3 presentation methods that you can use to be more persuasive next time. Number 6, what 3 things can you say to help your prospect to develop a mental picture of using and enjoying your product or service? Write them down and say them over and over again. Number 7, what are 3 benefits of using anecdotal selling in your sales presentation? And finally, what 1 action are you going to take immediately as a result of this session? Whatever it is, take it now.